disappearance amongst, and the shadows keep on changing. And I'm haunted by the lies that I have loved and actions I have hated. By the lies that roll the well inside my heart today. Don't cry, there's always a way. Here in November in this house of leaves will pray. Please, I know it's hard to believe. See a perfect forest through so many splintered trees. You and me, and these shadows keep on changing. And I'm haunted by the lies that I have loved and actions I have hated. By the promises I made and others I have broken heart. By the lies that wove the well inside my heart today. I'll always want you. I'll always need you. I'll always love you. And I will always miss you. Say please, one look at the ghost before I'm gonna make it live. Come here, I got the pieces here. Time to gather up the splinters, build a casket for my tears. I'm
Hey everybody, we don't have too many people here yet. I don't think anybody else is streaming, so I'm hoping that we get a few more in before we really get started. I'm really excited about tonight. We're going to talk about some cool stuff, and we may have some guests if they actually show up. I want to say hi to everybody that's here already. I think Cass is here. Lord Beerus, of course, my mods, John Bender, Brian Johnson, Save Robbie, and the Glare. Hello to everybody. What I want to talk about today, which is kind of why I chose the song, although Poe is one of my favorites of all time, absolutely love her work. But I want to talk about personal paranormal experiences. And okay, I know that a lot of people don't really believe in that kind of stuff, which is fine. But I think everybody's had some weird stuff happen that we can't quite explain. And the place that I'm from is rife with it. And because of that, or I don't know, I think some of the experiences I've had in my life are kind of connected to the place that I'm from, which I'll explain here in a little bit. I think everybody knows that I'm from a town that's really, really small. Once again, population less than 5,000 people. I don't live there anymore, so that's why I don't really mind talking about it now. The place that I live now is not much bigger, but it is a good bit bigger than where I'm from. They're both kind of rural areas. I always like to joke that I moved from armpit to ass crack. But the place that I'm from has a whole lot of history. A lot of really crazy things happened there. And there are lots and lots of rumors and stories and myths around the town. One of the main things that's a part of the town's history was known as, the town that I'm from is called Point Pleasant, and it's located in West Virginia. Once again, I don't live there anymore, so no, I'm not doxing myself. But anyway, it's supposedly got its name because I can't remember for sure. I think it was supposed to be George Washington stood on the main part of the town, which comes to a point, and two rivers, the Ohio and the Kanawha River, meet at that point. And that's where the park, it's like a historical park, is located there as well. And supposedly, I guess it was George Washington, stood on that point and said, "This is a very pleasant point," and that's supposedly where it got its name. Anyway, the first thing that happened there was the Battle of Point Pleasant, and that was, oh gosh, I'm real bad at history, even though I'm from there, and I had to take tests on it and stuff when I was in school. I can't remember which war it was. It was, I think, one of the battles of the Revolutionary War between the American Indians and, I used to work in Charleston, so I used to have to go through cross lanes every day on my way to work. Anyway, the Battle of Point Pleasant was between the settlers and the Indians, and the chief of that particular tribe, I want to say Shawnee, but once again, I can't remember for certain, but his name was Chief Cornstalk. And when he was assassinated, he supposedly put a curse on the town that the town would never prosper. And lots of bad things happen in that town for a town as small as it is. Lots of very young people tend to die in very weird and unexplained ways. I mean, besides the stuff, like drunk driving and things like that. Lots of really shadowy, odd things happen that result in deaths that don't get fully explained. A lot of activities that would be more fitting for a big city, like it actually has its own rumored mafia there. But one of the biggest things that happened that was somewhat blamed on Chief Cornstalk's curse was the Silver Bridge collapse, which I believe was in 1967. When that happened, it was during the holidays and rush hour, and 46 people died in the water when the bridge collapsed. The cause of the bridge collapsing was actually attributed to a faulty eye bolt on the underside of the bridge. But what a lot of people connect it to is one of the stories I want to talk about today, and that is an entity known as the Mothman. If anybody has seen the movie from, I believe it was 2002, with Richard Gere and Deborah Messing. That was based on my hometown. The Mothman Prophecies is the name of the movie. The movie is absolute shit. Don't see it. Or if you do see it, take it with a huge heaping grain of salt, because it's extremely exaggerated, and the book is much more factual and tells the story much better. I actually know some of the people that were named and described in the movie and book, and families. And in the movie, they portrayed them all to be toothless hillbillies, like the kind of people who would be like on the news talking about the tornado that went through the trailer park, like that kind of thing. And actually, the people that were involved were normal people for the most part. One of them was actually extremely wealthy, and the other people, they were pretty educated. Point Pleasant is kind of has a lot of wealthy people in it. It's not the stereotypical kind of place that you would expect if you've never been in the Appalachians or heard some of those stories. It's not the kind of place that you would expect from what you read about. Anyway, the Mothman was first sighted in 1966, I believe, when four teenagers, two teenage couples, were driving down the road towards an area that is known as TNT area. TNT area got its name because it was used by the United States government to store ammunition during World War II. And actually, there's still, to this day, some unexplained use going on. Just about 5 years ago or so, there was an explosion there that happened. So although they don't own up to it, it's my personal belief that the government still uses it to store stuff. And there's lots of other weird things. And the funny thing is that area is also doubles as a wildlife preservation. You can look it up. It's called McClintock. I think it's McClintock Wildlife Preservation. I'm not sure. But anyway, the place is huge. I had a friend who had a map of the area once, and it covered the entire wall of his bedroom from floor to ceiling and wall to wall. The place is absolutely huge. And we used to, when I was a teenager, that was where everybody went to drink and party. I'm sure that's what the people in this story were doing at the time. We go and have our fire in a trash can and drink warm beers. And when we got done, we'd climb up not really climb, but we'd put our empties, like hang it from the tree that we'd all center around. So we called it the beer tree, of course, because, we were clever like that. Anyway, this couple was driving towards that area, and this figure or creature started following their car. They described it as a winged, man-like person, about 6 or 7 feet tall. And they said it had red eyes, about 6 inches apart. The wingspan was about 10 feet, and it seemed to want to avoid the bright headlights of the car. They said that the creature was able to fly at incredible speeds. They're guessing about 100 miles per hour. But they said that when it was on the ground and running, that it seemed to be kind of clumsy. It chased their car to the outskirts of town in the air, and then it went into a nearby field and disappeared from sight. Now, a lot of people blew it off as a figment of his imagination, although it did make the papers at the time. And all 4 of the teenagers had the same story. They backed each other up. Over time, as days progressed, there were lots more sightings of them, not all by teenagers, and a lot of stories that went along with it, like the electric going out in somebody's house, and then they go outside and they see this creature there. And for those who don't know, they call this type of appearance a cryptid, which is kind of a man-like creature / beast that's unexplained. Anyway, over that period of time and the next year, there were more and more sightings. A lot of the people who had these sightings also had red, irritated eyes, like they'd been exposed to some kind of radiation or something. A lot of these people were respectable people. There were 2 firefighters who saw what they described as a very large birdman with large red eyes. There was a person who told us strange patterns that appeared on his television screen one evening, and then he heard a sound outside. He went outside and saw 2 red eyes resembling bicycle reflectors looking at him, shined a flashlight in that direction, and then he saw the rest of the Mothman. Also, that particular person's dog disappeared that night, and a lot of people attribute that as well to the Mothman sighting. Now, there have been a lot of people who tried to debunk that as an appearance of a large bird called a sandhill crane, but the size of the apparition didn't really go along with that. And some people got up close, and to it, and also say that there's no way that could have happened. Some people believe that it was a prank or a government experiment going on, or that they were testing some kind of weapon or something like that. There was never any explanation that anybody came up with. Anyway, eventually the story ran in the national press, and the sightings started getting more and more common. And there was also a lot of fear because the Mothman bore a resemblance to several demonic type entities that are found among those who experience sleep paralysis, which is one of the things that supposedly the residents of the area experienced a lot during this time, like waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a shadowy figure at the foot of their bed. Also around that time, there were a lot of UFO sightings in the area. Lights in the sky that resembled leaves falling. Other different kinds of UFO-like stories went around at that time as well. There was a famous story of somebody who was driving in that same area. It was a road in between, like the main part of town and McClintock, or what we call TNT area. And their engine just died from nowhere, and they couldn't get it to start. And then the winged figure passed overhead. After it was gone and out of eyesight, their car started back up again, and they were able to drive. There were also lots of appearances of what some people might call men in black at the time. But the weird thing was these people had a very distinctive appearance. Some people describe them as kind of Asian looking, but they were dressed like they came from the 40s. And the vehicles that they drove looked like they came from the 40s, but their clothing and their vehicles all looked brand new and were immaculate. They would show up and interview people who had seen the Mothman. One of those families, I actually went to school with their daughter, the Scarberries, and they interviewed the family about what they saw, and they said they wanted to record it, so they brought out their tape recorder, but they didn't seem to know how to work it. Like, they never plugged it in, things like that. They also said that they spoke in kind of a high, like, musical type voice. There were folks who claimed to have been contacted by entities. One was known as Indrid Cold, I believe, at the time. And they described like another world or existence that they supposedly came from. So lots of odd things that happened around this time. But the reason that I mention the Silver Bridge is because when all this was happening, people received phone calls and like mysterious phone calls. And when they'd answer it, there would be like static and like numbers being recited, or like just some kind of weird, like mechanical voice kind of talking gibberish. But some people also reported that the voice would tell them to stop talking about their Mothman sightings. And some folks say that before the Silver Bridge collapsed, the people who had visited, the men in black who had visited some of the families, were seen crawling around under the bridge doing something. And this happened about a year after the first Mothman sighting. The traffic was really bad. At the time, the Silver Bridge was almost 40 years old, and it connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio. And it was packed like end to end with cars. And it was built at a time when cars were lighter, so it wasn't prepared to handle that kind of weight. The bridge's design wasn't set up either with any fail-safes. So there wasn't anything in place to prevent something happening if one of the parts failed. And so what the explanation is that a single eye bolt near the top of the bridge on the Ohio side cracked, the chain snapped, and the bridge, which was kind of like a suspension bridge, just kind of disintegrated, and everybody went into the river. My dad was in the reserves at the time, and he actually helped pull people out, but 46 people drowned, froze to death, or were crushed in the wreckage. There's actually a video on here. I don't know if I could get away with. I'd like to play it for you all, but I'd be afraid. I'm afraid after what happened last week, so I'm not going to. And I'll see if I can find some photos of it in here later. But at any rate, in 1975 was when the author of the Mothman Prophecies came into Point Pleasant and looked around and talked to the different people from the area and wrote the book, The Mothman Prophecies. So if you find this story interesting, The Mothman Prophecies is a really interesting book. Now, I don't know how I avoided hearing this story, but I never heard it until I was in high school, and they started having the yearly Mothman festivals in Point Pleasant. And so I went and looked, and I read the book, and I was freaked out because I had always had all my life really, really, really vivid nightmares, like really vivid. And one of the most terrifying ones was the figure at the end of the bed kind of thing. And so when I read the book, it really did freak me out. But, you know, I never saw the Mothman or anything as many times as we went into to TNT area and partied and even went on a Mothman hunt or two and never saw anything like that, although I did have friends who claimed to, but, you know, that could have been drug or alcohol induced. But at any rate, the Mothman kind of became an icon after that. And the picture that I used for my thumbnail there is actually the statue that was based on one of the people who saw the Mothman's descriptions, and it stands in the middle of the town. Now, one of the reasons that I find all of this stuff interesting and weird is because I have a lot of weird personal paranormal stories and experiences from the time that I was very, very young until the time that I moved out of Point Pleasant. The strange thing is that when I moved out of Point Pleasant at the age of 22, my horrible, vivid nightmares stopped, And I don't think that I've had any weird paranormal-ish kind of encounter since then either. And that's been almost 20 years. But I thought it'd be interesting to make this the subject of my life because I do have so many crazy stories to tell. And I'm just curious as to how many people who didn't live in an area that's like a hot spot, like the area that I come from, how many other people have had experiences like this. Now, one of the other kind of odd things about the town is that supposedly people who are really into the darker side of the occult claim that there is supposedly a portal to hell at the point of Point Pleasant. So there is all this dark energy and stories attached to it. From the Mothman to the portal to hell to Chief Cornstalk's curse to all the young people that died at a really young age. But anyway, the experiences that I've had and the things that I've seen do make me think that there's kind of something about that area that makes it like a magnet for paranormal type activity. When I was young, the first really kind of odd thing that I remember happening was me having a dream when I was in grade school of smoking a cigarette and my mom catching me. Kind of a weird, common-ish dream, I guess. But I got up and I was in the living room watching cartoons, and my mom comes in and she says, I just had a crazy dream. I dreamed that I came into your bedroom and caught you smoking a cigarette. And many times over the years, I had a lot of dreams that were shared by somebody that I was close to in my life. And not all of them were like in the house with me at the time. I remember one very, very vivid nightmare that I had where, I neglected to mention that during the 80s, there was also a lot of Satanist type stuff. Kids were getting fascinated with Satanism. So there was a lot of stuff like that went on in TNT area as well. Like you would go out there and sometimes find like where they cut animals up and, done gross things out there. So there was like Satan worship type stuff going on. But I had a really vivid dream where my best friend and I were out in TNT area driving around, and we came upon a ritual of some kind being done. And we were kind of like hiding back in the bushes watching. And the leader or priest or whatever you want to call him just kind of like looked up in the middle of the ritual and like pointed his finger at me. And we ran away. And then I dreamed that I was working the next day, and my friend worked with me. And after that happened, as part of the dream, I dreamed that I was getting letters from him. And the stuff that he was saying to me was like weird, like devil tempting you to go evil type stuff that like came right out of your head. The kind of stuff you never talk about, but is always kind of like back in the deepest part of your brain. And the scary part of it wasn't that I was worried that something bad was going to happen to me, but that I wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to like join them. And then when the dream ended, I was at work. I was working at Long John Silver's at the time. And please, no smelling like fish jokes, please. But anyway, I was working the drive-through and I heard the alarm go off, meaning we had a customer. And before I saw who it was, I knew that it was the dude. And I was freaking out because I knew that he'd finally showed up and come for me. And my friend at the time that was in my dream, I went to work the day after I had this dream, and she came down and sat down across from me as I was eating something before work started. And she just looked like shit. And she says, "Oh my God, I had the worst dream last night. It was so fucking scary and so fucking real, and you were in it." And she sat down and told me almost word for word the exact same dream that I'd had that night before. Another time, I think I talked about this on my last slide, but I dreamed that my best friend that I was living with, my first roommate, was in the kitchen of our little apartment that we lived in, and I was sitting on the couch, and I could hear her in the kitchen screaming her lungs out and hollering for me. And I couldn't turn and look at her. I couldn't move at all. I couldn't get up, couldn't move. All I could do was sit and stare straight ahead. And the next morning when she told me about her dream, she said that she dreamed that she was in the kitchen and two guys had broken down the door and they were attacking her, and she was screaming for help, and she could see me sitting on the couch and I was staring straight ahead and not moving, like I couldn't hear her or something. But after I moved out, I didn't have any of that weird dream sharing stuff happened. And those aren't the only two. I mean, it happened a lot when I was young, and always with somebody that I was close to at the time, like a best friend or a family member or something like that. There was also a fad that went around when I was in high school, like the first year or two of high school and the last year or two of junior high. It was like a 2 or 3 year fad where people were really into Ouija boards. And they never worked. The funny thing was, like, whenever I was in the room, the things never worked. And it didn't matter who I was with. Even like I had some friends like years later after I graduated from school and stuff. I was with friends that I didn't go to high school with. So they didn't know anything about any of this. And we got out their Ouija board. Well, we found it and we started playing around with it, and the thing wouldn't work. And all it would do is say it hated me. And they asked the thing to point to everybody, and when they asked it to point to me, it turned around and started backing up instead of pointing to me. And they took their hands off of it and it just kind of flew off the table. And but the really freaky thing that happened, which really kind of scared me, is that I remember, and this happened more than once too, but this is the first time it happened, was that they were trying to get the thing to work. And all of a sudden I just noticed everybody was staring at me. And I was like, what? Like, why are you looking at me like that? And they told me that I had been out cold for like 5 minutes or so. And while I was out, I still had my hand on the thing and I was still sitting upright. But like I totally like passed out or something. And they said that thing talked to them the whole 5 minutes that I was out. And that after it stopped talking and stuff, I sat back up and started talking like nothing had ever happened. And I had no clue that anything had happened. And that happened more than once too. So, but the freakiest thing, and I know I'm kind of jumping around, but I'm just trying to give a condensed version of just some of the odd stuff that happened. The freakiest thing, though, but it's not scary at all. I grew up in a fairly religious household, and I was extremely religious at heart when I was younger. As a matter of fact, those Ouija boards actually said that they didn't like me or that they hated me because I believed in God. Now I call myself a patchwork spiritualist because I think that most religions have some part of it right, but I don't believe that everybody has it all right. But anyway, my boyfriend, when I was 19, I believe, he had a really, really bad car wreck. It was a drunk driving incident, and he almost died. When they found him, he was hanging out the driver's side of his car window, and he had been flung, or I'm sorry, his passenger side window, not the driver's side. He was hanging out the passenger side. But the way he had hit, like the way the impact had affected him, was that it had severed the major artery to his heart. They said the only reason he didn't bleed out immediately was because an air bubble had come up and somehow sealed it off in some odd way and literally saved his life. But even after they did the operation and they patched his heart like you would like a leaky tire, and even after that, he was in a coma for about a month afterwards. And the doctors had pretty much just told us to say our goodbyes, so I really didn't think that he was going to make it. So I was, of course, going through a really bad time spiritually, and I was still pretty religious at the time and, big into prayer. And I was really struggling spiritually with all those questions you get when something like that happens. Is there life after death? Do we go on? Is there something waiting for us out there? And I asked for a sign that there was something waiting for us after death. I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about it. But I remember having one of my very vivid dreams. And in my dream, I was sleeping in my dream. And my room was full of all this white golden light. And I dreamed that somebody was sitting on the edge of my bed and they were just kind of rubbing my back like the way a mother will do with a little baby who's sleeping or a child who is upset. And, it was very peaceful. It was very soothing. And I woke up. I was fully awake. Like I was awake for a little while. And there was somebody actually sitting on the edge of my bed. And the side they were sitting on was actually the side that was up against the wall. So nobody could really have been sitting there, but somebody was. And I didn't recognize the face or anything, but I felt like I knew them. Their face was kind of nondescript. There weren't a lot of features there or anything. And it didn't scare me at all. It didn't freak me out. I just kind of like reached over for them, like I was going to hug them or grab their hand or something. And they just kind of faded out really slowly, and left kind of like a outline of their face kind of hanging in the air for like a few seconds. And after they kind of faded from existence. And I always felt like that was kind of, I don't know, kind of my sign. I woke up the next morning and my mom, who was super religious, like extremely, extremely religious, and I told her about it and I thought that she would think I'd gone nuts. But to this day, she still swears that she believes me because just from the way that I told it, at first, I think she kind of wanted to think it was a dream, but I know even now, I know it really happened. And I'm not nuts. I know it really happened. And I just kind of feel like, that I was going through that time and whatever powers that were up there just decided to maybe, or to give me a glimpse of the other side, maybe. I don't know. But I felt like that presence didn't feel unfamiliar to me. So I always thought that maybe like I have had so many times where I should be dead, even as a kid. Like I was so sick and almost died so many times. And I always wondered if, maybe we don't each have a guardian of some sort. And, maybe I got to see him or a caretaker or something. But, life is so mysterious and so strange. And there's no way we can claim to know everything. But it's always given me a lot of comfort to know that, there is something else out there. Another kind of cool thing that happened is that, I told you that a lot of people that I went to school with and stuff died in very strange and mysterious ways. And we lost a lot of people who lived in our town at young ages. And I always had really vivid dreams. And sometimes it was about people I barely knew. Like I went to school with them, but I barely knew them. But in all the dreams, like I always knew they weren't supposed to be there. And I was kind of afraid to like even look at them directly or talk to them because I was afraid it would like ruin the spell, so to speak, and they would disappear if I acknowledged that they were there or that they weren't supposed to be there. And now, well, later, it's been a while. I did this a long time ago, but I actually did some looking into it. And there are a lot of people or beliefs where they feel that people who have passed can communicate with their loved ones in their dreams. Supposedly, the story goes that the mind is the most open at that time. So, yeah, like, I don't know. It's just, to me, it's kind of all connected with the town, because all of that stopped as well after I moved. So those who are in the types of beliefs that are centered around the earth believe that there are places of power, and they usually have to do with geological wonders, I guess you could say. And the area where we live, the Indians, the American Indians I know, felt that it was a place of power. They named the main park Tawindawee, which means mingling of the waters. And the two rivers coming together there, they treated it as a very powerful and meaningful area. And I can't help but wonder if there isn't something to that, because it didn't occur to me until just very recently, even though I've been out of that town for 20 years, that all of that stuff stopped. And some of it is good, because I had crippling nightmares. I mean, they were so bad that I was afraid to go to sleep for a long time. And I still have insomnia as well, even though I don't have dreams anywhere near like I used to. But all of that stopped after I moved away. So it is really strange. And I was just wondering if anybody here, has had experience like the kind that I've had. I'm sorry, I haven't been looking too much at the chat. I don't when I'm talking. But that's just kind of a very abbreviated version of my town story and some of the things that I've seen. So let's look at the chat and see what people are saying. How do you join devil worshippers? I mean, who has friends like that? Norma, I don't know. I didn't have any friends who did it, but there definitely were some in our area. Science dictates that it's because the mind is at its most relaxed state. That's why dreams can be so vivid, they seem real. I've actually heard that before, and I definitely believe that. And there's also, I've heard it said that small children are also more likely to have an experience like that because their minds are more open to it. So, I definitely believe that. I don't want anyone who's died talking to me. In the dreams that I had where they came back, not a single one of them talked. One time I dreamed that it was a guy I grew up with who had died in a drunk driving incident. And I dreamed that he was just sitting at our dinner table. And it was like nobody even noticed he was there. But and I was afraid to acknowledge that he was there or just like look directly at him or anything. So, my dream, I don't think any of them talked, come to think of it. Let's see. I'm glad I didn't die too. My mom talks about it all the time because I was sick a lot when I was a baby. And I guess when I was younger and I first started going to church and learned about heaven and stuff, I used to talk about being an angel all the time and how I couldn't wait to die and be an angel. And because I was so sick and almost died when I was a baby and a toddler, it freaked my mom out. She still talks about it now. She keeps on saying that she was afraid that God was just going to take me because I kept saying I couldn't wait to die. Um, you know, Reese, definitely there's a good reason why they freak you out. And I have had enough experiences with them that they freak me right the fuck out. I won't go near one now. When I was in high school, a friend of mine and I decided to make one. And we cut the letters out and we put them in a picture frame and then took like a shot glass and used it as a pointer. And that thing told us that it was a friend of ours and said a lot of really weird stuff. And when we went to school the next morning, we found out that he had died in that night in another one of our friends' car. I'll never forget that. Oh my God, it freaked me out so bad. So yeah, I would never go near one now. And I don't know if probably everybody knows this, but the movie The Exorcist was supposedly based on a semi-true story. And the kid who was possessed, I think in the real story too, it all started with the Ouija board. And of course, if anybody's ever seen the fucking movie Witchboard, oh my God, that movie is freaking terrifying. Terrifying. Deja vu. I don't know if that's paranormal or not. I think that depends on the interpretation of it. Some people feel like deja vu is like a premonition. And some people feel that it could be like a glitch in time, like, in the Matrix, it's like a glitch in the Matrix. So I guess it depends on what you believe. I think it very well could be. Because I believe that sometimes we get a glimpse of things, that are to come. I've never had that happen that I know of, but yeah, I think that it very well could be, depending on what the experience is. Some folks also believe that it has to do with other dimensions and other worlds and all that stuff as well. So you just never know. There's so many things in this world we can't explain. The world is a creepy place. It really, really is. Oh, damn it. Oh, shit. My YouTube's locking up on me. If I disappear, don't freak out. And I'll be right back. So I'm just afraid that I might lose my connection and might have to reboot. Can you still buy Ouija boards? Yes, I believe you can buy them as a board game. Like, I think that's how they market them. But hold on, I'll find out real fast. Yeah, you can buy them on Amazon now. And they're priced at anywhere from Oh, no, that's a movie. Hang on a second. And that's a blanket. Here we go. Winning Moves Games Classic Ouija. $16.92 on Amazon. So yes, you can definitely buy them. Walmart. Okay. Most toy and occult stores. It looks like we have some new people in the chat. Yeah, Milton Bradley, that's where we had ours at first. And after I saw the movie Witchboard, Toys R Us, Lufa, it is not in business in the U.S. anymore, I don't think, but in Canada, Toys R Us still exists. I don't know if it does in other countries or not, but I know it still exists in Canada. Anyway, I dropped my link if anybody wants to talk, to come on and talk about any of their stuff. I always find stuff to say when I start running out of steam. I always find stuff to say if I have a co-panelist. So if anybody wants to come up, You know, I always welcome anybody to come and put in their input. I thought Katrina was going to stop by and do some readings for us, but I haven't seen her yet. So kids don't play with toys anymore. Ain't that the truth? It's all about Xbox and video games. It's coming back. Toys R Us is coming back. That would be cool. I miss it. I'll be honest. I am a big fucking kid, and I miss Toys R Us. I do. I liked it. Yeah, The Exorcist was that the little girl used the Ouija board by herself. And supposedly when you do that, when you use it for yourself by yourself, it leaves you open to demonic entities. Some people believe that the only spirits that can communicate through Ouija boards are actually, some people believe that the only spirits who can communicate with people on earth are evil ones, because one of the prevailing or predominant beliefs is that when good people go to heaven or nirvana or whatever you want to call it, that they don't have any knowledge of what goes on earth. I don't necessarily believe that myself, just because of the experience that I had. And I do believe that whatever or whoever that was inherently good. And I'm sure that everybody here probably thinks I'm a nut, especially the more skeptical folks. But I consider myself a really open-minded person, but also at the same time, I'm very cynical. And I really believed that actually happened. Paranormal Parlor. I heard that was actually a girl, and I wanted to say she was German, but I also heard that it was based on a couple of different people. So I'm not 100% sure what's the truth, because there's so many different stories about that. I'd say it was probably actually a combination of the different ones, or of different stories, but I don't know for certain. And I read the book when I was in high school, and I don't think it actually said anywhere who it was based on, only that it was a true story, but it's been so long ago that I don't know now who summoned a demon. Oh, you're not a demon, Nikki. You're just a little bit evil. That's different. Where kids use Ouija boards to tamper with the afterlife for fun. Ain't that the truth? I remember using that thing. I was going to tell, my sister had one when I was a kid. And when I was young, I watched The Exorcist through no fault of my own, but I watched it. And I was scared of everything after that. I was probably like 5 or 6 when I saw The Exorcist. And oh my God, Jesus, I was scared of everything after that. My sister had a Ouija board, and I saw a witch board, and I was so damn scared of that freaking thing. And I tried like hell to get rid of it. And I don't know if my sister was just sneaking it back in or what, but that thing kept appearing in my bedroom all the time. I was so scared of it. Like I was stalked by the damn Ouija board because it'd appear under my bed. Like I go throw it in the trash can outside, and then the next morning I'd see it like up under my bed and stuff. So I'm sure my sister had to have done it. I don't really believe those things like are resistant to being burned and stuff like that, like some people do. I don't believe that. So I'm sure my sister probably did it. But at any rate, I was never terrorized by anything as much as I was terrorized by that damn Ouija board. So is anybody here familiar with the Mothman story or the movie or any of that stuff? I was kind of surprised. I figured that I figured that it'd be probably well known. Or the Silver Bridge collapse. Like, is anybody familiar with that? Now the Mothman, like, yeah, the movie was really stupid, Norma. Although I do highly recommend the book. It was amazing. Or are you talking about the Witchboard movie, maybe? Hi, Marie. I'm sorry you're late too, but that's okay. You just missed my opening story is all. Try not to piss humans or spirits off, animals and insects too. I really think that that animals, or at least cats for sure, can see things that we can't. Of course, they may be jumping at shadows or dust motes or tiny little things that we can't see, but I see my cats like staring at stuff all the time, and I just wonder if they aren't seeing stuff. Anyway, the Mothman isn't the only, or Point Pleasant isn't the only town that has a Mothman. I've heard of some. There's a city, I think, in England, and I've heard of other sightings like around the world. I think that the most concentrated number of appearances happened in Point Pleasant, though. When I was at one of my first jobs as an adult, I was working at a call center for a cell phone company that is defunct now. It was absorbed by AT&T, but it was called Singular Wireless. And they did this icebreaker thing where everybody got up and said their name and where they're from and a little bit about themselves and blah, 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 blah. And around here, the Mothman story, like in our tri-state area, is pretty well known because they have the Mothman festivals and stuff every year. There's a Mothman museum in Point Pleasant. There's, of course, there's been 2 movies made. There was one really, really bad movie, like B movie type bad movie that was made, as well as the one with Richard Gere and Deborah Messing in it. And the book, there's been more than just the one book too. And you can go online and look and see, like YouTubers that go there and, go around the places that are still left. There are a lot of like buildings and stuff that were used to store ammunition. And there was an old power plant in that area. And they're all really crazy looking. There was one that we used to call Stonehenge because it had the remnants of the building were shaped like Stonehenge, only instead of in a circle, they were in a straight line. And no idea what kind of purpose that it served at the time, because it doesn't look anything like the structure of a building. But it's crazy because it's all out in the woods and there are all these ponds and everything. And then you can be like walking in the woods and all of a sudden you can see like the foundation of a house. And it's very obvious that like a building that used to be there. Like you can see like the bones of the plumbing and stuff in the ground still. And it's crazy because it looks like wilderness and it's supposed to be a protected. So the place is really, really creepy and crazy anyway to go exploring. But there are these buildings that we called igloos because they're shaped like igloos. And that was where a lot of because some of them are open and not in use. Some of them are locked up. And I think that the government still stores ammunitions there. Hence the explosion that was unexplained that happened about 5 years ago or so. But the igloos are really crazy and you can go in there and now back in like the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of like teenage Satanist types who would go in there and, graffiti it up and paint pentagrams all over the place and cut up bunny rabbits or whatever it was they did. So it wasn't much fun to go looking around, but now it's not. It's still got graffiti, but it's not that crazy now. But you can go in there and look around, and there are a lot of YouTubers that will go up there and go around to those landmarks and stuff. There's also a hotel that's on the main street of Point Pleasant. It's called the Low Hotel, and it's supposedly haunted. So, if you get bored and are interested in that kind of stuff. But the igloos were a really kind of nifty place to be because of the way they're made. They're like an endless echo. So you can go in there or drive your car up to it and like beep the horn. And instead of like a regular echo, the echoes overlap. So a short beep would just sound like beep. So, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there to look at. And exploring it is actually pretty interesting. I spent hours and hours and hours when I was a teenager doing that, because in Point Pleasant, there's no movie theater, there's no bowling alley, there's no skating rink, like there's nothing to do there at all. And so what we did was we either got in our cars and drove from one end of town to the other and then turned around and went back and did it again. And that was what we did all night long. Or we would go up there and either get lost on purpose to see where we came out, which was actually really interesting because you could drive around in there for hours and you'd eventually come out somewhere. But like it could be like in a completely different town. It was just because it was just so big. And anyway, a lot of people, I was talking about I got off track, I'm sorry. A lot of people claim to see similar creatures to Point Pleasant's Mothman. Chernobyl, I believe, supposedly there were some sightings similar to the Mothman that happened, around that time. So some people believe that he is a harbinger of doom. There are others that believe that cryptids like that are there to warn you that something's going to happen. Norma, there are still videos on YouTube. Right now, YouTube's locked up on me, so I can't go in and search without rebooting my computer. But if you search for the Mothman, then you'll find some stuff. A moth in a man's mouth. A Mothman is the guy that I was talking about in the beginning. Should I go over it again? If you miss it and you want me to tell it again, like a brief version of it, just drop a 1 in there and I'll go over it again. I don't want to do it if everybody's heard it. But I know a lot of folks have heard of the Jersey Devil. Like the Mothman is our town's version of that. It's kind of put it on the map. And the place that I live in now has a lot of supposedly haunted places and stuff as well, but nothing like Point Pleasant does. And it's really funny because it is so tiny and kind of a shithole, really. And people will come, from all over the country to check it out. Okay, Marie, the Mothman was the town that I grew up in, Point Pleasant, has a what's called a cryptid, which is a being that nobody knows exactly what it is. Ours was called a Mothman. The Mothman, he was about 7 to 8 feet tall. He first appeared in the 60s, and he terrorized a couple of teenage couples on a road that leads out of Point Pleasant into the TNT area that I was talking about that was used as a storage for ammunition in World War II. And after that initial sighting, there were lots of sightings of them by lots of different people. Not all of them were crazy. And Men in Black showed up and questioned some of the people that had the sightings. People who saw the Mothman had some symptoms of like radiation exposure, like red eyes, for instance, like their eyes were real red and irritated for a couple of days afterwards and sensitive to the sun and stuff. And weird things happen, like with a lot of UFO sightings, like their electric would go out. Or there was one family whose car just quit running, and then the Mothman appeared and flew over their car. And after it was gone and out of sight, their car, they were able to start it up and go again. And this was in like the 65, 66, something like that. It all, like the sightings died down after the tragedy known as the Silver Bridge collapse happened in 66 or 67. And when that happened, 46 cars went into the water. This was in December, like right around the holidays. And people either drowned or were crushed to death, or I think some people froze to death as well before they could get them all out. But 46 people died. Some people believe that the Mothman was a warning that there was something about to happen. Some people believe that the Mothman brought it on. Some people believe that the Men in Black were responsible for it because supposedly the Men in Black, who actually didn't have normal human appearance, but some people say that they were sighted at the base of the bridge before it collapsed. The Men in Black that appeared kind of spoke strangely and dressed like they were from the 40s, and their vehicles were like they were from the 40s, but they were all brand new and in impeccable condition. And they didn't seem to know how to do things like operate a tape recorder, even though they were supposed to be government officials questioning the people who had sightings. And I actually know one of those families who were visited by the supposed Men in Black. And if you mention it to them, they get really, really freaked out and very, very upset, and will just quit talking to you. Like they won't even talk about it. Anyway, the Silver Bridge collapse, the official scientific explanation for it is that an eye bolt broke. And because the bridge was like a suspension bridge, if one part goes bad, pretty much everything just kind of collapses. So this eye bolt goes bad and breaks, and the whole bridge pretty much disintegrated, and the whole bridge full of people all went into the river. And since this was right in the middle of rush hour during the holidays, it was packed bumper to bumper. And I do remember, like when I was a kid, having to ride the ferry to go to Galplis. I was born in 74, so it was a while before they were able to replace the bridge. But you can still go to Point Pleasant, as they put the bridge on a completely different side. So you can still go to Point Pleasant and see where the bridge used to be. So it was a terrible thing. But not to make everybody listen to everything again, but just to give you a little bit for those who just first came. That wasn't the first really crazy or disastrous thing that happened there. Point Pleasant is a site of lots of paranormal type of activity, starting with the Battle of Point Pleasant, which was a battle between the American Indians and the settlers. And the town was supposedly cursed by an Indian chief who was assassinated by the settlers. He was lured into I think it was Fort Randolph, and under the guise of peace. And I think it was when he entered, he was killed. And, but anyway, his dying declaration was that nobody in the town would prosper, I believe, was how it was worded. And so a lot of times when things happen, they blame it on Cornstalk's curse. But supposedly there's also, for people who are really into the occult, there's supposed to be a portal to hell on the point of Point Pleasant, which is where the two rivers meet. The site of the Battle of Point Pleasant is a historical park called Twindawee, which means mingling of the waters. And I believe that's Shawnee, but I could be mistaken about that because it's been a long time since I actually learned about it. And I'm kind of ashamed of myself that I didn't go and look all this stuff up. But you think you know everything word for word until you start trying to talk about it. And then you kind of forget a lot. But I was telling the story and about some of the paranormal experiences that I've had in my life and how crazy some of them were. But the weird thing is that when I moved out of that town, all that stuff stopped. And I don't remember having anything that I could think of as like a spiritual visitor or a ESP type of experience or anything like that since I moved. But when I lived there, I had all kinds of crazy things happen, like shared dreams with friends and family who were really close to me, and just all kinds of crazy things happened. Anyway, and there were lots of disasters too. My graduating class, my high school population was probably about as big as most people's graduating classes is. Like, that's how small our school was. And because the town's population is about 5,000 now. And so it was less even then. And I think, I'm trying to do the math in my head. I think like we probably lost 6 or 7 just members of our class in a couple of years, because 10th, 11th, and 12th was what we had in high school. And that was just during the years we were in school. But there was a lot of, like, of course, there was the drunk driving incidents and things like that happened that everybody kind of goes through. But weird things happened too. Like there was a kid who was shot at a party. And nobody knows, like even the people who were there when it happened, nobody can explain what happened, and nobody seems to remember. My story about Point Pleasant and Mothman is on Google. Yes, it is, Aquarian Baby, and it's everywhere, actually. You can Google it and find the story. You can also buy the book, The Mothman Prophecies, and you can watch the movie, although I don't recommend it. The movie is bullshit. But yeah, it's pretty, the town is fairly famous now because of the movies that were made. Oh, damn. My computer's really irritating me. If I were to reboot and come back later, in like just a minute or two, I wonder if I'd have to start a new live. I'm getting really irritated. I'm having technical difficulties here. Marie, if you read up on it, I really recommend the Mothman Prophecies. I think that one is the most accurate because it was written not long after everything happened. And John Keel, the author, actually went and spent time with people who went through those experiences themselves. And he also goes into how some of the sightings and stuff, like similarities to other sightings, and like how mythology and what's the word I'm looking for? How people's superstition can change people's perspectives and things. So I recommend that one just because it was written around that time. There have been lots of other books, but they were written like in the early 2000s after the movie came out. There is a book that is basically just a compilation of photographs and newspaper articles and things that was written by, I believe it was Jeff Walmsley, whose family I also know really well. He sells it, like he runs the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. And I think he wrote that book. If I could get my crap to work, I'd look it up for you all. But that one is good if you want to see like pictures of TNT area and the newspaper articles. And I think, it has a little bit of the author's insight as well. But the guy that wrote the Mothman Prophecies, which was the first book that was written about it, I believe, did a lot of interviews with the people who went through it. And of course, a lot of them have passed since then, although not all of them have. But I think it's important to note that it wasn't just like a bunch of drunken young people or, toothless hillbilly rednecks like they portray them to be in the movie. But it was a lot of different people with different backgrounds and different social circles. And they all saw the same things and told the same basic story and had the same or similar experiences. And the stories all kind of jibe together. So I think that's important to keep in mind as far as the story goes. I'm sorry, I hope you all don't mind. I really want to reboot this computer. So if you will give me, it is 32 minutes after now, give me about 5 minutes. And if I can't go back into this one, I think I can go back into this one. And you should be able to just refresh. But if it doesn't start in about 5 minutes, then just go back and I'll start a new one. But I'm going to reboot this thing so I can pull up some information and to make sure I'm giving you all the right, telling you all the right stuff. So if you don't mind, just give me about 5 minutes and then catch me back and I will be right back, okay? Yeah, I'm going to end the broadcast now and I'll be right back. I'm sorry. Sorry about that, y'all.